Gamers, we got some sad news. If you're an AOE3 fan, look away right now. I don't play AOE3. I haven't played AOE3 actually, but obviously I'm in the Age of Empires franchise, so I kind of wanted to give my little opinion on this because it is a bit weird, but let's get into it. So last year, I think at the start of last year, they announced Age of Empires 3 DLC. AOE3 got DE as well, and it was kind of going well. And player base in AOE3 is not higher than AOE2 and 4, but it is better than AOM. On October 10th, they announced that the expansion or the DLC will be delayed. With many active projects across the franchise, we'll be pushing out the release for the DLC to a future date. This decision was not made lightly. It's based on the bandwidth of the entire Age team across World's Edge and our partner studios. We understand that this may be disappointing for you who have been excitedly waiting for the news. Yada yada and yada yada. Well, that was October 10th, and January 28th, there's a new update. Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition DLC news. To our Age of Empires 3 explorers, last year as part of the New Year's New Age event, we announced another DLC for Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition. After serious consideration, this DLC has been cancelled. Straight up, it's cancelled. It's gone. No more. Please understand this decision was not made lightly. We apologize that we haven't provided updates to you since our announcement of the DLC. While considering the inclusions for the last year's show, we wanted to ensure that AOE3 players felt part of the franchise celebration, as we know you have huge passion and love for the game. Wait, so they just announced DLC because they were like, yo, AOE3 is in there too. And then they canceled it? Huh? However, pushing to ensure that the game was included meant we announced content before it had been built, and we now feel that announcement was premature. We know that this is a huge disappointment and many of you were excited for more content. We were able to put out a patch for the game towards the end of last year, but understand that it was not the size and scope you were hoping for. It has been a joy to bring Age of Empires 3 into the modern day with the Definitive Edition, all the content we've added since launch 2020. We hope you continue to enjoy everything it has to offer. Seeing what content our community creates is a fantastic part of working on this franchise, and our modders continue to surprise us. Blah, blah, blah. Whilst we will not be moving towards with this DLC content with Age of Empires 3, we will continue to maintain servers, rotate civs through the free trial version, and provide customer support for any issues you may encounter. The Age of Empires team. Okay, so this is bad for AOE3, okay? So, a bit confusing to me, and I'll explain why. A lot of people have said, is this good for AOE4? Is this good for AOE2? Is this good for AOM? I don't know exactly, and I don't know if it's even public, which teams are working on which games. So you have like, you have World's Edge, you have Microsoft, you have Relic, there's another one that I'm forgetting. And they all work on Age of Empires, Forgotten Empires. Yeah, I mean, Forgotten Empires, the irony. So all of them work on Age of Empires games. Now, some of them only work on AOE2, some of them only work on AOE4, some of them work on AOE3. So I don't know exactly which team worked on AOE3, because I've seen these comments a lot where it's like, oh, AOE3 is canceled, so now they're going to develop AOE4 and AOE2 more. That doesn't necessarily mean that, okay? Like, as simple as that, or they might have moved to another project. Now, what's weird to me is the fact that they chose to sack AOE3 over AOM. Now, if we look at the numbers are not good for Age of Mythology at all. So Age of Mythology was released recently. So this is Age of Mythology. This is what it looks like. This is the retold, how many players there are. So it only got released about 5 months ago, and it went from 10,000 average players peak, 26,000 to 6K peak, and it is dropping. Now, I remember they announced they're gonna do like Chinese gods at some point and stuff like that, and there will be a bump, right? Whenever there's a DLC or an expansion, there is a bump in player base and all that. But right now, average players is 2.8K. I think AOE4 average player base is above 10K, with a peak of like 20 something K. So there's like AOM compared to AOE4, AOE4 has like a lot more players. Now, if you compare Age of Mythology Retold, which again, there's like more hype because it's newer release, it's down to like 2.8k, right? Average last 30 days. Now, if you compare Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition, they're gaining players. They're not gaining massive amounts, but they're also not bleeding players. Like, this is kind of what AOE4 or any game on Steam looks like. Sometimes it goes down and there's a patch and an update, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, and so on and so forth. But you can see that it has been steadily growing for a couple of months, and the average player base is 4.4k, peak player 7.6k. So it is going up. So looking at all this, AOM has less of a player base, and I'm suspecting that even when the new DLC for AOM comes out, I do not think it's going to pop off. You know what I mean? I think it's going to peak a little bit and it's going to drop again. And this is what I mentioned when I was playing Age of Mythology. I didn't think the player base will stick. Like, I didn't think it would have 10, 15, 20,000 players playing at any given moment. But to me, what is weird is that, like I said, they sacked AOE3, but AOM DLC is coming. Now, this is what I think. Again, I don't know anything behind the scenes, right? So it's like, even if I knew, I'm not gonna leak it. But I'm suspecting if they're canceling AOE3 DLC, I would assume AOM is next. I would be shocked that, I think what's happening is they probably wanna stop both AOM and AOE3, but they're probably too deep into AOM DLC. Maybe they invested too much money, I don't know. So I think they're gonna probably go with AOM DLC, and then they're gonna call it quits there. Because if they didn't continue with AOE3 that has more players, why would they continue with AOM after? So I would assume they're going to, I would assume AOM is next. Because to me, looking at the numbers, that makes sense, right? Now, what does this mean for AOE3? Now, as someone who, like, everything I've said so far, I'm saying as a, not as an AOE3 player, but these things are very, like, common, and looking at numbers. And also, I have played a game you might have heard of, StarCraft 2, and I have played Heroes of the Storm, and I have played a bunch of other games, and I have seen what happens when the developers stop supporting the game. It's not good. It's not good. Why? Well, there's a thing where if you're playing a game and the devs give up on it, or the company gives up on it, you kind of lose that hype for the game. You know, there's nothing, like, there's no updates, right? Like, there's no updates. There's no DLCs coming. There's no updates. Potential for, like, esports or something plummets because there's no future being developed, okay? This happened in Heroes of the Storm. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this story, but I'll tell you because I was in Heroes of the Storm quite a bit when this happened. Because one of my IRL friends was playing on a team in HOTS. Basically, Blizzard in like September, October of whatever year it was said, you know, next year is going to be big. We have tournaments. Everyone was hyped. Everyone was happy. Teams signed players. And then I think Blizzard in late December, early January just said, we're not supporting esports anymore. And instead of like releasing 5-6 heroes a year, they're gonna release like 1 or 2, something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers, but that completely obliterated HOTS. Completely, like the HOTS player base plummeted. I remember you couldn't find game. It was so bad at that time that like silvers were matched with diamonds and whatever the highest league was, because there was just not enough players queuing. And that's because you're playing a game that you know has no future. Now, Blizzard since then added a few heroes for HOTS, but it's like very minimum amount of work. Very similar thing happened with StarCraft 2. Now, you might say, well, StarCraft 2 is still going strong. Yes, but StarCraft 2 suffered big player base loss when the devs basically said, I think this was 2018 or 19, if I remember correctly, where they said, you know, we're trying to get to a point in the game where it doesn't need any updates, and that's kind of it. So, what's different with StarCraft compared to AOE3? Well, StarCraft 2, first of all, is way bigger, than AOE3, right? The community is a lot bigger. There's a lot, like, more people organizing weekly and monthly tournaments with a lot of money. ESL and DreamHack or whoever was organizing tournaments were putting in a lot of money. There was the tournament in like Saudi Arabia for like $1 million. So the players had the incentive to stay. And even though the devs gave up, it wasn't as bad of an impact as it could have had. Like if the whole esports scene in StarCraft 2 was dependent on Blizzard and Blizzard just called quits, the game would have like suffered greatly. But community kind of picked up and StarCraft is still going. But I've talked to a lot of people and it's like they're releasing like patches apparently like after years now, but it's like by the pro players counseling, and it's like heavily dependent on the pro players, and it's just in this weird state. And yeah, the point is, whenever the developers calls quits on their game, it is not good. What do I think is going to happen with the player base? I mean, we'll check again in 30 days. I will assume that the player base will go down. A lot of people were probably playing because they were waiting for DLC. Maybe they're like, you know, they haven't played in a while, you know, and then they started playing again because of DLC. When all that hype, like they were expecting DLC at the end of last year, right? And now they were expecting it at the beginning of this year and nothing's happening. So I think a lot of people are going to call it quits. Some of the players maybe are going to go AOE2, some AOE4, some might just quit completely. Now there might be community events and stuff like that, but I don't know how strong the community in AOE3 is and how many tournaments they organize. If that is not high enough amount for the top players to keep competing and playing there, they might call it quits there. So it kind of just snowballs. Like, you know, it goes from one bad to the other and so on and so forth. Now, I don't know how good the modding tools are in AOE3, so maybe they have really good modded maps and people might still keep playing, but it's a different vibe. And they also shut down Legacy AOE3 some weeks ago, so AOE3 Legacy players were forced to buy DE in order to play multiplayer to just get cancelled. That is a big yikes, actually. Yeah, that is bad. This also what game did this happen to as well? It happened with Warcraft 3. Yeah, Warcraft 3 refunded. Same thing happened. I mean, yeah. So basically, what does this mean for AOE4 or AOE2? I think AOE2 is more than fine on its own. I would be very surprised if developers stop creating DLCs for AOE2. I don't think, like, creating a DLC for AOE4 costs more money than creating a DLC for AOE2 because of the stuff I talked about before. First of all, it costs less. They're not developing as many unique buildings, unique features, unique units, animations, and everything else. It's more or less like the whole civ is the same, and then they add 1 or 2 units, and then it's a new civ, right? And then they write some bonuses out. In AOE4, civs are a lot more like different and unique and complex. So developing any civilization in AOE4 is going to cost more money. With this, does that mean they're going to stop developing for AOE4? Like I said, different teams work on different projects. Different teams have different funding. It would be very weird, in my opinion, if they stop developing AOE4, especially after the whole biggest expansion ever kind of thing, for them to just be like, you know what, we're gonna call it quits. I feel like when I saw those streams from, if you guys remember, like last year in March, during like some gaming events, they had streams with Age of Empires games and announcements. And I don't know if you guys remember, they gave us like a badge. That's it. They announced like everything for every game. They just gave us a badge. I actually wonder if another DLC for AOE4 was not planned at all, and they only did it because the DLC did that well. The reason I say this is I genuinely don't think they expected that AOE4 DLC is going to be the most sold DLC. If you were planning to make another DLC, why wouldn't you announce it, right? Now, another thing I know, and I know this from Blizzard, from StarCraft 2, and I know this for every bigger gaming company. So, you know how there's like quarterly investments or quarterly like funding splits within the company, and which games they're going to develop and which teams are going to go where and do what. So basically, whenever the DLC was released, if they saw the first month, oh, this is the most sold DLC, they actually cannot do anything with that information until a lot later, okay? And what I mean by that is, let's say they did not want to develop AOE4 anymore after the first DLC, not the second one. Last one was the 2 civs and 4 variants. And then they're like, oh my god, this is the most sold DLC. We should do another DLC expansion. After that point, until that gets approved, it's gonna take at least 6 months. Okay? Until they actually, require funding, all that gets approved is gonna take at least 6 months. If, let's say that was approved in June, and we're waiting close to a year for another DLC, the timing kind of makes sense. So my point is, I kind of wonder if there was no plan to release AOE4's DLC, and then they just released it because it did well. It is a bit scary for AOE4 as well, because, like I said, it costs a lot more to develop civilizations, so I'm hoping nothing happens. I know that Microsoft, World's Edge, they are doing a lot of tournaments this year and stuff, so it kind of looks like, I feel like tournament-wise, it has picked up from last year. Like, I feel like last year was pretty poor. This year, I feel like it's picked up from their side, so I kind of feel like that's a good sign. And I hope in the future, they continue making DLCs and they continue releasing updates and so on and so forth. Otherwise, it would be very, very bad. Another thing that I know is it's very hard to convince sponsors to sponsor a game that has ended in a way, right? That has, the devs are like, yeah, we're kind of done here. So yeah, what can I say? When the AOE4 DLC releases, you better buy it. You better buy it, or we might not be here for another one. But that's it. I think it's pretty sad for AOE3. I feel bad for the players. I feel bad for the casuals. It is what it is. Obviously, we don't know what's happening behind closed doors, so I'm just speculating these things, but that is it. Give AOE3 the development future of the game an 07. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you. If you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.